What is the funniest instance of rage quitting you have ever experienced? I was 3 months pregnant with my first child and attempting to do the taxes online, our first year of doing taxes together. My husband had just made me a sandwich and I couldn't figure out what one of the questions was asking. I asked my husband for help and he wouldn't answer me, so out of frustration, I picked up my sandwich and frisbeed it towards him. It somehow managed to stay together and he snatched it out of midair and took a bite out of it. I burst into tears and ran from the room crying. Not sure if that counts. Well, I pictured her throwing the sandwich while it was still on a plate and was impressed at her husband's ability to eat ceramic. Story 2. When I was in my early 20s, I worked overnights in a customer service role with a group of other young adults and one man in his 40s. He clearly didn't quite fit in with the younger crew who tended to joke around and engage in harmless antics. We were mostly unsupervised during our overnight shifts, leading to various shenanigans that clearly bothered him. However, our employer didn't mind as our shift consistently met all its targets and didn't have to witness our chair jousting in the halls. His breaking point came one night when a buddy and I were talking loudly about a book we were both reading. We noticed him at his desk making that angry, heavy breathing sound. That angry individuals sometimes produce, which they think sounds intimidating but often comes across as a wheeze. We asked him what was wrong and he whirled around yelling, "Spoilers!" "What?" we asked. "No spoilers," he roared. "What? You two are spoiling that book for me." "Oh, you're reading it now?" "No." "You're reading it soon?" "No." So, to be clear, the two of us can't talk about a book we're reading because you might want to read it someday? Yes. Well, sorry, but the book is over 30 years old, dude. Sometime in the preceding 3 decades, you could have read it. No, no spoilers ever. So, we're not supposed to talk about anything you might want to read or watch in case one day you decide to read or watch it? Yes. Well, that's not going to happen, especially with things older than we are. He got up from his chair, his face red, and started bellowing. He tried to stare me down. I just started laughing because here was a grown man throwing a temper tantrum. When he realized his attempt to scare me into silence wasn't working, he grabbed the sides of his head and ran out of the office and down the hall, screaming. We heard his screams fading away like in a cartoon. Then we went to the window and saw him running across the parking lot. Faintly, but distinctly, we could still hear him screaming through the thick glass of the window until he got into his car, drove away with a long streak of rubber, and sped off down the road. We never saw him again. I had explained to my boss that the guy quit because we were talking about a book he hadn't read and had no plans to read but might want to read someday. Story 3. My brother was defeated by a frost troll in Skyrim and he got so mad that he took the game out, bit it in half, and chewed it. We had to take him to the hospital because his mouth and his teeth were messed up. It was hilarious. Story 4. I don't even know what caused it, but I was playing Halo 3 with a friend of mine who was relatively well known for his anger issues. Someone defeated him, or the match ended and we had lost or something, and over the headset I heard "ah," followed by a yoink as he literally bit through the cord to his mic. Story 5. I was at a poker table in Vegas with my brother, Bill's Gambling Hall, super casual 50 cent to $1 hold'em game. A large pot is maybe $80. My brother ends up heads up with this other guy and wins with quad nines. Turns out there was some sort of bonus at the casino. Win with quads or better and your name is in a draw for extra cash that Sunday. Gotta be playing to win it though. We won't be in Vegas by then. Brother says, "Anyone at the table going to be here on Sunday?" The man he has just beaten says, "I will." "Fair enough. Here you go. You basically bought it from me," and hands the gentleman the comp ticket. A third party, this old man, loses his crap, starts screaming about how he works all damn day for comps at this low-limit table and starts threatening my brother and anyone who defends the decision. In the next 5 hands, he drops close to $500 trying to buy pots he feels it is his right to win, regardless of the odds. He leaves penniless within about 20 minutes. Story 6. My friends were having a Super Smash Bros. Tournament in 2003. It was a Samus versus Samus match, game number 7, winner takes all. I was down 3 lives to 1 when the game started sending me hearts, which fully restored damage. People watching began whispering to my opponent that he was going to lose, that he couldn't win, and that the game hated him. Sure enough, I pulled off an epic comeback. He stood up, threw the controller at my face, breaking my glasses, and ran out of his house. While I was sitting there, he returned about 30 minutes later after cooling down to apologize. We then proceeded to tease him relentlessly about being a sore loser. In response, he kicked us all out of his house. Story 7. I was playing Settlers of Catan with some family members, and I forget why, but I wound up getting super close to winning, only to see it all fail at the last minute. So I did what one normally does in this situation, slammed my cards down, yelled, "This is frickin' BS," and I stomped off, only then to realize that among the group playing was a 6-year-old niece. Story 8. I was working at a small company, less than 10 employees, and the 2 lead developers were brothers. One day, I walked into an office where the two brothers were arguing about how much oil and gas is actually in North America. The younger of the two brothers is getting angry that his brother won't believe him, and he says, "Why are you arguing with me? I've done the research." At this moment, I quipped, "Well, if you would have searched right the first time, you wouldn't have to re-research." At that moment, he jumps up from his chair, starts grabbing some of his books, and storms out of the office saying he's not putting up with this crap anymore. Yeah, he quit right then and there, on the spot. Everyone pretty much thought it was funny, but I felt pretty bad for being the catalyst that set him off. Story 9. Back when I was a teenager, I played this MMO called Asheron's Call. This game didn't have a trade window, so people would have to trade items by handing them to the other player. So, naturally, people would scam others out of trades by simply not handing the payment over and keeping the item. There were a handful of well-known thieves on my server, Leaf Cole, what up? So I took it upon myself to hunt these people down and steal from them. I mercilessly scammed this one thief. Using an alt character, I convinced one of the thieves that I'd trade my sweet, very valuable, robe for his entire suit of matching black armor, about 9 pieces. Back then, having a matching suit of armor was a big deal because you couldn't change the color of armor. It took me an hour to convince him to hand me some of his pieces, then eventually I got him to hand over the entire set. So he's standing there and I decide to equip all of his armor. I then just take off running towards town. He can literally do nothing but plead with me to give him back his stuff. I stop halfway to town and tell him that I know he's a thief, and this is what it feels like to be stolen from. I'm sure this absolutely ruined his night, but what I did after that probably pushed him over the edge. I ran to town and handed most of his stuff to a town crier NPC, deleting it from the game. Then I copy-pasted him the text of me doing this. Before I logged off, I added him to my friends list so I could see when he came online again. I don't ever remember seeing him log back on to that game again. I kept his sweet black helm as a trophy. Story 10. Original WoW, Silithus, right after the AQ content. Farming Twilight cultists with other rogues. Horde rogue saps friend, tries to gank me, gets destroyed. Rescue farming. Horde rogue tries for another 15 minutes or so to defeat us by kiting mobs, sapping, etc. We get fed up and start camping him between farming. Kept him camped for 3 hours while he tries to res and Hearthstone. Received whispers from level 1 Alliance character. He had made a character on another account to give us crap. Said the best line I've ever heard, "You guys suck, everyone at the internet cafe is laughing at you." Turns out he was playing at an internet cafe in the Middle East and had just spent 3 hours of rental time getting camped for being a schmuck. Story 11. A couple of times a month, a buddy of mine would host a low-stakes poker game at his apartment. It was a $20 buy-in, winner-take-all, usually with 4 to 6 people. The host was semi-professional and typically won. He had played in tournaments and casinos, usually doing well, even winning a couple. So one particular night, everyone had busted out but me and the host. It was 2:30 a.m. and we had almost the same amount of chips with no end in sight. At my suggestion, we both agreed to go all in, blind on the next hand, winner takes all. He dealt and I ended up with pocket aces with the other 2 aces appearing on the flop. He flipped out, yelling about my lack of real skill and finesse, how I was a total amateur, and so on. He ultimately kicked me out of his apartment. I ended up having to call a cab as I had planned on crashing on his couch. Much beer had been consumed. He apologized the next day, though, and he offered to pay me back for the cab, so I suppose it all ended well. Story 12. Oh, I have the perfect story for this. So, a few years back, I was dating this girl who was, for lack of a better term, a huge witch. I was young, I didn't know any better, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, she always had to put me down and be smarter, always had to be right, that kind of girl. While she was in her dorm and I was at home, we were playing a friendly game of dominoes over the internet. I've never played before, and I beat her. I didn't rub it in. God knows I would never survive that, but still, she signs off, blocks me on AIM and Facebook, turns her phone off, disconnects the phone in her dorm, and does not talk to me for like 3 days. I have no idea why I put up with that for so long. Story 13. I was dungeon mastering a game of D&D, and I had a player who insisted on playing only if his character could be a 14-year-old female human. I managed to convince him to make her 16 as that's the youngest playable human age, but it still felt a bit unsettling. In response, I decided to be a little mischievous but not overly harsh, so I gave him a 1 in 4 chance of acquiring a cursed on-equip weapon when he purchased items from the shop. Little did I know he would buy 20 small hammers for throwing. Consequently, he ended up with a bunch of voodoo weapons, and by chance, one of them carried a gender change voodoo. We managed to reach level 3 without any of the voodoo activating because he was playing fairly normally. But then he wanted to fidget with the hammers. I rolled a d20 to see which hammers he had taken, and one of them was the gender change hammer. After I explained what had happened, he declared, "My character pulls out her sword and hurts herself, now himself, in the face and passes away," and then he tore up his character sheet. Story 14. I rage quit a job once, and it was talked about for more than a year after. I was working at a Subway sandwich shop. I'd worked there for about 4 days and had quickly become everyone's witch. When I wasn't making sandwiches, I was cleaning. When I wasn't cleaning, I was doing prep. God forbid I'd stand still for 30 seconds. If I did, I'd get screamed at by the manager to get to work. All the while, I'm working my back off while the other 3 people on my shift are literally standing still talking nonstop. After a full shift of getting screamed at, I took the store owner aside and asked for a transfer to a store about a half-mile down the road. I explained that I couldn't work for the manager and needed to be moved. The owner decides the manager and I just need to have a heart-to-heart. During the heart-to-heart, owner and manager both start yelling at me for being lazy and trying to get out of hard work. I took off my work shirt and threw it at the owner, screaming, "Screw you, I quit," and walked out. As I'm walking out, the owner yells, "Make sure to clock out before you leave." Almost a full year later, my friend Lisa introduced me to her friend Stacy. Stacy says, "Oh my god, did you work at Subway?" Apparently, my story had become legend. Story 15. Getting so overheated from rage at Soul Calibur 5's new game mode, the ridiculously hard one, that I had to take off my shirt and turn 2 fans on. I was screaming so much at that crap I almost lost my voice. Prozac and Valium were great at ending all emotions besides anger, I guess. Story 16. My younger sister was playing the Wii and couldn't beat some parts of Twilight Princess. She tried again and again and again before she stood up, let loose a barbarian war scream, and threw the Wiimote at the ground, shattering it. She then literally grabbed the Wii console and cracked it against the coffee table, permanently jamming the disc inside. She realized what she had done and freaked out, running out the door. This all would have been hilarious if it had been her Wii, not mine. Story 17. In the original World of Warcraft, battling Oxia was a challenge. We had been getting thrashed for hours when one of the off-tanks swore there was a specific spot where we'd be safe from her deep breaths. By this point, everyone was grumpy and tired, so it was worth a shot. Through pure luck, we managed to burn her down to a few percentage points of health, and just before we could celebrate, she unleashed an attack that instantly wiped out the entire raid. Over Ventrilo, we heard the bang of an exploding CRT monitor, and one of our tanks calmly announced he was done for the night. We brought in another player and finally defeated her an hour later. Modern players who joined after the Wrath of the Lich King expansion truly don't know what they missed. Story 18. One evening, I was playing Halo Reach, waiting in a game lobby for a big team capture the flag match to start. Amidst the lobby chatter, some guy was loudly insisting that everyone vote for a specific map. "Paradiso, guys, come on, Paradiso, come on," he kept yelling. I got fed up pretty quickly, so I chimed in with, "Man, screw Paradiso." Well, this really agitated him. He started yelling again. The rest of the conversation went something like this. "What, you gay? I'll bet that's it. You're gay, aren't you?" At this point, the chatter of the other players had quieted down considerably. "And what if I were? Would that make you uncomfortable? Do I make you uncomfortable?" This was followed by a rather uncomfortable silence in the game lobby, punctuated by the loud player quitting before the game even started. Story 19. In high school, a friend of mine was notorious for raging. However, he was one of my closest friends, so I overlooked it. We went through a phase where he'd come over to my place every night and we'd play a few games of Magic the Gathering. One night, I just couldn't lose. Everything just went my way. After each game, he witched and called everything that I did cheap. Finally, after several losses, he just seemed to snap. He sat there for a moment, staring at me before quietly packing his stuff up and getting up and walking out without saying a word. He never brought it afterwards. Story 20. I used to play a lot of Street Fighter with my friend. He called me up excitedly, telling me he just bought the new Panasonic 3DO and Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Neither of us had cars, so I had a mile to walk to his house, but I walked fast. When I turned onto a street, I could hear him screaming his bum off. When I got to the driveway, I saw his 3DO laying in the driveway, smashed into bits. He told me that as soon as he got off the phone with me, he continued the game of Street Fighter he was playing. He got to the end, and Bison drew the crap out of him for almost an hour straight. After finally winning a round and coming close to beating him, Bison threw the crap out of him and won. My friend then set his controller on the floor and punched it, breaking his hand. He then unhooked the 3DO and threw it out of his second-story bedroom window into the driveway. I never even got to try it. Story 21. This happened on Magic the Gathering Online. I was playing an anything goes match against someone and I went first. I laid down one island and passed. My opponent then proceeded to have the most amazing first turn I've ever seen. Either he got the luckiest draw ever, or that set was incredibly broken, but he was essentially able to draw unlimited cards and lay unlimited mana on his first turn. It was a complicated process, and his turn took 20 minutes or more just laying more and more mana. When he gets to about 30 mana, he taps it all and hits me with a fireball. Unfortunately for him, I had a counterspell that cost 1 mana and countered the target spell unless they paid 1 mana. Oops. He typed "screw you" into the chat and quit. This day, it's still my favorite single match of Magic. Story 22. I was playing NBA Jam on the SNES with a friend. I was the Utah Jazz, and I think he was the Bulls. The first quarter, I was winning, but not by much. Then in the second quarter, I went on a huge run with Karl Malone. I had him shooting threes as well as dunking all over Scottie Pippen. Malone was on fire several times. My friend finally scored a basket near the end of the quarter. I had just under a second of time. Carl heaves a full court shot and makes it. My friend just jumps up and yells, BS! He turned off the game and walked out of the room. I will never forget that victory. Story 23. I was playing Call of Duty Black Ops 2 one night, and this one kid was being a real schmuck over his mic. He was super arrogant and camping like an absolute annoyance. Then, over his mic, I heard his dad come into the room and just freak out. What the hell are you doing playing games now, you little a-hole? Go to bed! Some violent noises occurred and the kid promptly left the game. Karma is a witch, camper. Story 24. This happened 13 years ago. I attended a math and science-oriented university where you were lucky if a fellow peer even looked at you in the eye when speaking. The class was Intro into the History of Science. It met from 7 to 10 p.m. on Monday nights with 15 bored, disinterested students forced to take the class by university requirements, falling asleep while the professor droned on about bacon. Not the delicious meat that would have been awesome, but Sir Francis Bacon. I was sitting next to the professor, trying to stay attentive, and I could see a kid named Robert across the table reading Calvin and Hobbes on his iPad. All of a sudden, Robert let out an incredibly high-pitched, shrill laugh at a fairly high decibel level. The professor calmly called Robert out and told him to put the iPad away. It was an innocent enough exchange, and I expected to go back to being bored to tears shortly. Robert, however, would not back down without a fight. He screamed, "No, who are you to tell me what to do? Why do you get all the talking time? Keep in mind, this is college." The professor, as chill as can be, calmly replied, "Well, I seem to have a PhD in this field. Do you?" At this point, Robert lost his composure. I don't remember the exact phrasing, but he screamed something about wanting to talk about his interests, how the professor was an egotistical maniac who would never let anyone else speak, how he knew so much more than her, and that the whole class was a waste of time. Robert was now very red, huffing and puffing in his seat. He then jumped out, spiked his iPad on the ground, and ran 3 circles around the table, making the most peculiar grunting noises that only a nerdy math major could produce. He then gathered his things and acted like he was going to leave. Rather than heading for the door, though, Robert made a beeline for the classroom's second-story window. As previously mentioned, Robert was a nerdy math major. He lacked the coordination to climb out of a window, but nonetheless, defenestration was his chosen method of leaving the classroom. The professor, again as calm as could be, said, "Robert, we have a perfectly fine door over here. There's no need to climb out the window." To which Robert replied, and this is an exact quote, "No, I have not made nearly enough of a disturbance to show how mad I am at you." So, while Robert was attempting to climb out of the window, the professor calmly went back to talking about Sir Francis Bacon. Everyone in the class, apparently much more mature than I was, perked up and joined the discussion while I was biting my tongue with all my might to keep from cracking up. There was a kid in my college class trying to climb out of a window because he was upset he couldn't read Calvin and Hobbes. After 5 minutes of failing to climb out of the window due to his lack of coordination, Robert finally walked out of the door, never to be seen again. And that, my friends, is how Robert rage quit HPS 10. And if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 25. I was playing StarCraft 2 as Terran. I'm not very good at the game, but I decided to play a ranked match. The enemy was Protoss, and from the very beginning, he started chatting with me about how terrible I was. He easily scouted my base and spent a great deal of time taunting me and telling me I was managing my economy incorrectly. I told him to stop talking and to just play, as it was becoming irritating. I managed to send a scout to his base, and I saw he had built a few carriers. The last thing I saw was him sending them toward me as my scout was eliminated by a swarm of carriers. I took my force of about 20 Marines and Marauders and sent them away from my base. In chat, I typed GG with no hope of winning and began my final stand. All my buildings launched and flew in different directions. If this guy was going to be rude, then darn it, I was too. When I saw his carriers attacking my flying barracks, I began my attack. My small army started taking out pylons, and soon his primary base and all of his probes were gone. I destroyed his first nexus. I then headed to his sprawling second base. He had half the map covered in buildings, but only one more nexus. "Come on, just quit, you've already lost," I saw in the chat window. "Never surrender," I typed back. He responded with a subtle, "Screw you, OMFG noob, just surrender, this is bullcrap, I freaking hate Terran noobs." I had lost track of his carriers and I had a single command center left. I sent it to a corner of the map and my Marines took aim at his final nexus. By some divine luck, he didn't notice me firing at it. I brought it down to 10% health. A carrier came into my view near my already burning command center, 5% health left on his nexus. The interceptors launched from the lone carrier and started toward my command center, 1% health left on his nexus. I stimmed all my Marines and realized he had more than one carrier.
8 carriers arrived and surrounded my Marines just in time to see me destroy his last Nexus. Victory appeared on my screen. I laughed. I tried to send him a message through battle.net and was met with, "This user is not currently online." I'd won my first ranked match and made someone literally quit out of the game. It was a good day. Story 26. A few years ago, my group of friends were really big into RuneScape. I was never too big into it, but I knew they were. They would get on Skype and play together every day. I would later get a Skype call and talk to them regularly, but this particular instance happened before that. So I guess in RuneScape at the time, one of the most rare items in the game were dragon claws. One of my friends got them and was really happy. He was ecstatic that he finally got one of the rarest items in the game. He went into the wilderness wanting to fight some guys, so he brought along his inventory. What he had forgot to do was put the dragon claws in the bank. What followed was what has been described by my friends as the funniest thing they had ever heard. He got defeated while he was in the wilderness with dragon claws on him, rage mode on from off. They heard screaming like something from a horror movie. He went into his kitchen and grabbed a knife like a big butcher knife. He damaged his wall with that knife out of pure rage. This entire time, my other friends were just laughing nonstop. To this day, I think the hole in the wall from the knife, it's still there. Also, to this day, whenever my friend gets mad at something, we usually remind him of what he did during the famous dragon claws incident, and then he calms down. I wish I could have been there. I think that might have been the funniest thing I've ever heard if I was there to hear it myself. Story 27. Keeping in mind that I'm fairly a petite woman, I was playing bingo at our local fair. Most of the time, I'm not super competitive, but the prizes were pretty great. You could even win cash. I was playing with a friend who happened to be very wealthy. She won 4 rounds in a row and over $75. As soon as she screamed bingo after her 5th straight win without saying a word, I stood up, flipped the table on its side, and proceeded to walk home. I've never been so filled with rage as I was that day. Story 28. Me and 2 friends were playing some L4D2. One guy said, "Crap, wait a second." He sounded really freaked out. He stops moving in game and we spend for what seems like a half hour waiting for him. He gets back, both angry and freaking the crap out at the same time. He tells us before quitting that he heard someone breaking into his house and he ordered his pistol at the person in the room. The intruder rightfully went the hell away, but the friend was clearly ramped up in adrenaline and he was waiting for the cops to show up. Another friend, as a kid, used to rage at his controllers and games. If he got angry, he would stop playing and throw controllers, cartridges, and sometimes the console itself everywhere. Story 29. I was about to get my bum kicked in Axis and Allies. He cleared the entire German army so that next turn he could swarm the UK in one more move. I brought in my last remaining pieces and took over Berlin with 1 soldier and an amazing roll of dice. He destroyed his windows with a dice and broke panes and cracking another. I left him to make a window out of cardboard and tape. Story 30. My roommate and I used to play Halo Reach with a bunch of friends, and we decided to play shotgun only. My friend, who admittedly is very good at the game, wasn't feeling it that night and was getting creamed by just about everyone. Towards the end of the game, everyone decides to gang up on him and teabag him after he is defeated. After 15 defeats in a row, he had enough. He picked up his Xbox and threw it at his wall, obliterating the entire thing and putting a decent-sized hole in the wall. That ended our Halo party pretty fast. Story 31. Oh man, my friend and I had some of the worst rage episodes when playing Counter-Strike back in like 1999 when I was 14. I took the game so seriously that when I lost, I would often punch my CRT monitor. I was not a smart child. Or punch walls or throw my keyboard or mouse. I once pounded every key off my keyboard in a flurry of rage. I also punched a CRT monitor 2 inches into my friend's drywall. My friend once raged so hard he stabbed his CRT with a Bic pen, and there were permanent chips with ink embedded into it. He also once kicked through and tore down a whole wall of drywall in his parents' house. On a local CS server, 2 kids got into an e-peen contest and picked an IRL fight with each other. The server cleared of its 30 people and we all ended up at a park watching them duke it out. Both kids were my friends, so I just watched and laughed. One kid's nose got damaged really quickly and ended the fight after about 30 seconds. Story 32. I was in an unusually long line at the methadone clinic. Yeah, I know. When the guy behind me started throwing a fit because he didn't think he should have to wait. He made sure to complain for a good 15 minutes before getting loud, knocking down the dividers, punching the wall, and attempting to slam the glass door. It was the best example of "I'll show you, I'll hurt myself" I've seen in a long time. Story 33. My favorite rage quit happened while playing a board game called Galaxy Truckers. So, Galaxy Truckers is a time-based shipbuilding game that is pretty hilarious in its own right. Halfway through the second round, my friend, who has been muttering, cursing, and failing the entire game, just stands up, says screw it, flips his entire ship over in the middle of the table, and walks off to get a beer. Everyone is laughing their faces off. The end. Story 34. I was playing Madden once when throwing a bullet pass behind a linebacker's shoulder. As he was running full speed to the left, he stopped as soon as the ball left my QB's hand, and Ballerina jumped behind him, catching the ball gracefully with one hand, defying all laws of momentum and motion, and returned the interception for a touchdown. I lobbed the controller, underhand, not overhand, straight up into the air, figuring it would just land either on the couch next to me or hit me in the head or something, whatever. A half second after it leaves my hand, I hear clack clack, and the controller launches into my LCD monitor. I forgot that there was a ceiling fan right above my head. I decided, at that moment, I would never play Madden again. Story 35. Back in the early days of Halo 1 and Xbox to Xbox, routerless LAN 4 vs 4 matches, I was part of the men's freshman 8 rowing team at my rather tech-focused high school. We brought 2 Xboxes, a spool of cable, and some termination ends with us on a trip to nationals, or some high-level event I don't specifically recall. We spliced a crossover cable that could run between our 2 rooms and played various combinations. Bow 4 versus stern 4, ports versus starboard, powerhouse versus strike bow pairs, and every other setup we could think of. By the second night, the men's varsity and JV boats were joining our games, hanging out in the rooms with us, and occasionally even winning matches. The competition started getting quite fierce, and the trash talk became quite brutal. At some point, someone discovered, or at least demonstrated, the teabag move, and things escalated significantly. Insults moved from personal to familial. Eventually, sisters were mentioned, and suddenly we had gone too far. There was a ferocious bellow, and our room was suddenly filled with the rest of the freshman boat, and the entire JVA team seeking refuge from the terrifying rage of one of the gigantic Varsity 6 seat rowers. We quickly closed, locked, and chained the door behind them. The matches themselves became intense, but it was mostly quiet. Only the occasional scream when someone got sniped or scored a particularly effective grenade termination could be heard above the frantic clicks of the controllers. We got serious, keeping our best players in. No one mentioned the 6-seat sister, until the team joker on the JV boat got a chance to play and named his character something like, "I did that to your sister." The varsity team either didn't notice themselves or noticed, but managed to keep their testosterone-fueled teammate from seeing the name for most of the round. Then, a defeat, a teabag, and a guttural roar. You see, unbeknownst to us freshmen, our joker had, in fact, been with the aforementioned sister, quite recently, in fact. We discovered this when our doorframe was kicked out of the wall by that enraged, powerful man. Luckily, a coach happened upon us at that precise moment and managed to calm the situation down. But I will never forget my personal shining moment as the Joker calmly looked at the splintered doorframe and said, "Here's, you know what I'm going to say, Johnny." Story 36. There was this guy who recently joined a COD lobby after a game was over. He was talking to his friend about how another friend of his sucked at Call of Duty. One guy in the lobby said something like, "Oh, he sucks at the game?" Gamertag. 0 points, as he had 0 points just joining the lobby, unable to have any from the previous game. He responded, "That's just because I just joined the damn lobby, you freaking a-hole, god dang it," and left, rage quitted a lobby. Story 37. A coworker of mine was really bad about showing up to work without notice. He was about to get fired for it and then didn't show up for a few days. He apparently had been busted for DUI for the 3rd time and was in jail. When he did show up, the department head called him into her office. Before he even got to her office, we heard, "I quit, you dried up old schmuck," and he went out to sit in his car that he wasn't supposed to be driving. She called the cops because she was worried he would do something crazy. He got busted for driving without a license on the spot, and we never heard from him again. Story 38. This one's easy. I have a few only child friends, and their reactions to losing could be quite intense. I remember one friend who would constantly yell at his NES. Then when we were playing Top Gun and he saw I had managed to land on the aircraft carrier, after he'd been trying for 4 months without success, he jumped up, popped the game out, ran outside, and stomped on it repeatedly until it broke. We were only 9 years old at the time. Another instance involved me playing Street Fighter for Sega Genesis with another only child friend. We'll call him Tony. I wasn't a fighting game person. He was. He would always end our gaming sessions at his house by mercilessly beating me in SF2. We did that for about 3 years until we got older. Fast forward 13 years, and as 27-year-olds, we found an old Genesis and some games, including, of course, SF2 Turbo Edition. So we went through our normal routine, playing all the old favorites. Then he wanted to play SF2. I tried to beg off, saying I hadn't played since we used to, but he insisted, saying, "Yeah, I haven't really either." We started playing, and it was clear this guy had been practicing. After about 10 minutes, I paused the game, walked over to the Sega, pulled out the game, walked out to my back deck, and threw that game as hard as I could. There was a freeway behind where I live, and I'm a couple of stories up, so it was incredibly satisfying to watch that game bounce about 6 times and then get smashed to bits by a semi-truck. I walked back in and said that we wouldn't be playing SF anymore. He just nodded and said, "Cool." That was the calmest rage quit episode ever. Lastly, Tony and our other friend were staying at my house for a sleepover in 97. We had just gotten a PlayStation and were mostly playing Madden and NBA Live. Tony was great at fighting games, but only good at Madden, and the three of us would compete all the time. Well, this time he was getting thoroughly beaten, and the whole "the game is cheating" drama started, so I decided to avoid the tension and go chill some sodas. I went into the kitchen, saw we were out, and walked back through the room to get to the garage where we stored the sodas. As I walked through the room, I casually said, "I'm going to get some sodas and stick them in the freezer." Tony was in the middle of arguing with her other buddy and turned to me, yelling, "Man, stick it in my back." We were all shocked. I replied, I'd rather not. This set off roaring laughter over the comment, which has now continued for 15 years. It was the most awkward rage quit ever. Story 39. Some kids were playing Guitar Hero in the hotel lobby while I was waiting for someone. The one kid got something like 47%, and his little brother pushes him aside, saying that he'd show him how it's done. Cranked it up to the hardest difficulty. Unfortunately, he was about a half second off in his timing and probably lost with a 0% on the song. He didn't throw a tantrum, didn't say a word, just shoved the controller at his brother and walked away. Story 40. I was playing Mousetrap on Christmas night when I was about 4 or 5, about 18, 19 years ago. I was doing awesome. Next thing I know, people are laughing and having a good time, and I didn't know what happened. My mouse had been trapped. I flipped my crap. I flipped the entire board into the air and jumped on my older brother, about 13 years old at the time, and just started punching him in the face and chest repeatedly. Screw that game. Also, this is on a recorded VHS somewhere out there. Story 41. For context, I'm a 40-year-old guy. My son was playing Call of Duty 3 or 4 and let me play for a while. These young players kept sneaking up behind my character and taking me out, saying things like, "Haha, you're not very good, evil Elvis." I finally had one of them in my sights, but the batteries in the controller went out at that exact moment. I quickly plugged in his wired controller, but the cord was faulty. Unless you held it in at just the right angle where it connected to the controller, it would cut out, which it did just as I pressed the fire button. The player defeated my character. I threw the controller at the wall, naturally, and still feeling frustrated. I threw the chair I was sitting on into the wall too, making a loud sound. I looked over at my son and saw his wide-eyed expression. My heart rate was through the roof. I haven't played a video game since. Story 42. I once had a roommate who was playing Civilization, likely Civ 4, given this was a few years ago. He was playing on one of the harder difficulty settings, possibly Deity. Anyway, he had been doing quite well and was apparently in the lead score-wise. Then Gandhi finished the Manhattan Project. I don't think I need to get into more detail there for those familiar with the game. About an hour later, he slammed his laptop down so hard that the monitor broke off, remaining attached only by its internal cables. He also cracked the bottom portion around the fan grating. Then he realized his homework was on that computer and he didn't have backups. And he threw a lamp on the ground. It's funny, in hindsight, but I was actually a bit concerned at the time and kept trying to calm him down before he broke any of my belongings in his rage. Story 43. I was playing the first Black Ops a while ago with a rather annoying British kid, no offense intended. We were in a gun game match and I was having a really good day. We were playing on Nuketown and this younger player was ahead of me. He was at the crossbow and I was just below him, though I can't recall my exact weapon. He ended up charging me in the small blue house. I used my knife and ended up winning. I didn't have a mic, but he did, so I was just sitting in the lobby while he was visibly frustrated. The next match, I beat him by a long shot and then again and again. Eventually, he got incredibly upset and said he was getting backup. Soon after, an American kid logged on and announced he was going to defeat me for bothering his brother. I ended up defeating both of them twice in that round and things became quite heated. Now they were both really angry with me as we went into the next round. Almost at the end of the round, a lady with a very thick New England accent reached the crossbow just as I swooped in and eliminated her with the ballistic knives. Now she was furious. In the lobby, they made a pact to destroy me. Next, we were on Summit, my favorite map. The round started, and after working my way up, I reached the ballistic knives and decided to mess with them by running around, using only the knives on everyone. I focused on the British kid the most, and after a while, he just snapped. I heard a deep inhale, and then the most anger-filled scream, followed by crashing sounds. I was sitting there laughing, and then I heard a squeaky little voice say, "Guys, I just threw my controller at the wall, I broke my mic, I gotta go." That was probably the most fun I've ever had online. Also, my grandma once got so upset that Notre Dame lost a game that she got in her car and drove for an hour before realizing what she was doing. Story 44. My girlfriend had a friend who often got very frustrated while playing video games. I remember one instance when they were playing first person. He was complaining about an eyelash. Not even 5 minutes later, I heard a scream from across the room. "God damn this eyelash." This was followed by a smashing sound, a crack, and more yelling. Apparently, the kid had smashed his keyboard because he had an eyelash stuck in his eye. And if you saw yourself in one of these stories before while playing video games, because I certainly did, here's more for you at YouTube. Thanks, you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that one.